Hello and welcome to Family Matters, a webinar from the Deseret News and the Institute for Family Studies. On Family Matters, we tackle the most important questions related to our most important social institution, the family. I'm Brad Wilcox, Professor of Sociology here at the University of Virginia, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Family Studies, and a contributor at Deseret News. On this edition, we're talking about Republican Glenn Youngkin's come from behind victory in the state of Virginia. A victory which was powered by Virginia parents. Concerns about lockdowns, the intersectional turn in Virginia schools, the status of gifted and talented education, and school safety were all key issues in this race. But it's also the case that these issues were turbocharged when Terry McAuliffe said, quote, "I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach," unquote. It was this comment that gave a lot of parents cause for concern and led his popularity, Youngkin's popularity, to surge among voters who had indicated education was their biggest concern. So given these dynamics, what should Governor-elect Youngkin and Lieutenant Governor-elect Winsome Sears do to make good on their mandate here in Virginia from parents? With me to kind of think about this question are three distinguished guests. The first is Ian Rowe, who's the co-founder of Vertex Partnership Academies and who recently stepped down as the CEO of Public Prep in New York City. We also have Max Eden, who is a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and Kim Rishi, who is the Distinguished Education Fellow for Parents Defending Education. Let me begin by asking Ian some questions about this race. You know, when I was listening to the election returns on Tuesday night last week on MSNBC, you know, a number of the hosts on that particular show said that there was really no critical race theory playing out in Virginia schools. That was a kind of, you know, a dog whistle from Republicans. You know, what's your perspective on this, Ian? Do you think that there, you know, has been a role for CRT in Virginia public schools? And if so, you know, what's your take on that issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, Brad, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. And as you mentioned, you know, for the last 10 years, I ran a network of public charter schools in the heart of the South Bronx and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. More than 2,000 families, almost all low-income Black and Hispanic families. And, you know, these were parents who just wanted the best for their kids. They wanted a school that taught their kids about the pathways to opportunity and success. And, you know, parents don't want to have their intelligence insulted. And so when they heard these media reports that critical race theory wasn't being taught, it's just really disingenuous. And I do think it's always important to define critical race theory in these conversations. And I always go back to what the architects said. According to Richard Delgado, one of the original intellectual architects behind CRT, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. So that means critical race theory challenges equality of opportunity, equal protection under the law, equal rights. So those are some pretty anti-American principles. But in practice, critical race theory absolutely shows up in schools. There's a group called Parents Defending Education that's put out an amazing report that shows just 20 of the ways that CRT is showing up in Virginia K-12 schools. It ranges from a professional development class for teachers. It's a 2-hour, 7-class course. It's AC 1608, How to Be an Anti-Racist Educator. There's a module on exploring and understanding whiteness, or the inherent internalized dominance of white people. That's just one example at the adult level. At the kid level, in second grade, in Fairfax County, second graders were shown a woke kindergarten video that has the message, quote, "I feel safe when there are no police," end quote, under the presumption that all police are racist. So when parents hear the media and these educators, there's no critical race theory, you know, don't believe your lying eyes, they say bunk. And they came out in big numbers in this election to show that they've had enough of it. And one last point, I think this is not just about critical race theory. it's also about parental notification and consent, because it's not only that parents were seeing these things, after the fact. They didn't know that this was even going on in their schools, right? So they felt that their schools were being taken away from them. And I think parents came out in big numbers to say that that's not the way that they want to have a relationship with their schools.
And just to follow up here, I think one idea that I hear expressed around this sort of set of issues, a suite of issues, is this thought from the left that people in the center and on the right don't even want to talk about race in our public schools, don't really want to address the sort of the dark sides, the difficult chapters in American history. What's your thought about kind of that concern here?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a nonsensical straw man that's often sort of put out there as a way to divert attention from a real conversation. I don't know a single person, left, center, right, who says we shouldn't learn about Frederick Douglass, we shouldn't learn about the Tulsa Massacre. It's an idiotic framing to divert attention. I'm actually part of an initiative called the Woodson Center 1776 Unites, a group of primarily led by Black intellectuals and activists and practitioners who've actually created a curriculum that teaches a much broader and expansive story of the African-American experience in the United States, warts and all. So not only teach about the Tulsa Massacre, but also talk about the entrepreneurship and wealth in the Black community that led up to all business development in Tulsa during that period, as well as the rebuilding after the Tulsa Massacre. So I think the focus is how do we teach a more expansive and authentic history, not this false cherry picking as the discredited New York Times 1619 Project has done to teach a very narrow and false version of American history.
Thank you. Max, talk to us about the concerns that parents in Northern Virginia had kind of heading into this election. From your vantage point, sort of sitting across the Potomac, was it lockdowns, the extent of very long lockdowns here in the state of Virginia that was a concern? Was it sort of the fate of schools like the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in terms of how that school was being treated by its administration in the state? Was it school safety or all these issues? Like, what were kind of the key drivers from your perspective that led a lot of Virginia parents to look for a change in the governor's seat?
The short answer to all of your questions is yes. It was the lockdowns. It was the attack on Merritt and Thomas Jefferson that was particularly trenchant for folks kind of living in this area who have kids who aspire to academic excellence. It was this curricular turn that you and Ian were just talking about, and the way in which the curricular turn was being shielded from parents, and parents were being, gaslit by folks in the media and by folks in their school district to insist that they shouldn't believe their lying eyes. They should listen to what they're told. But maybe the thing that really broke it, I think, was reporting by Daily Wire reporter Luke Rosiak, who exposed the fact that this gentleman who had kind of become the poster child in the media for domestic terrorism at school board meetings was actually upset because his daughter had been raped in the women's bathroom of the public school, and the school district leaders publicly denied that any such assault took place and then transferred that student to another school where he allegedly committed another assault. And so once that hit, I think these other concerns really crystallized, right? I mean, it can and it perhaps should be a pretty tall order for parents to flip on their public schools. It's not a nice thing. It's not a desirable thing. And school closures, you can have your goodwill arguments about it. Curriculum, you can have a reasonable debate about it. But when it comes to a school denying and failing to address and enabling sexual assault and showing really no sincere apology over it and kind of playing true to form to every accusation that can be leveled against them, I think that is what really kind of crystallized to parents that something was really going wrong in schools here and kind of by extension schools across the state.
So kind of Max, in light of these kinds of concerns that you saw play out in Northern Virginia, what are some of the kinds of steps that you think the new administration can take to improve the school climate when it comes to things like school safety and to kind of restore parents' faith, in their public schools in Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was an article in the Washington Post, I think 2 days after he won, where the reporter had spoken to experts and decided there's actually really nothing the governor can do because the governor doesn't control curriculum. And that's total nonsense. There are 3 very easy steps, some of which will require legislative approval, but I think should be very easy to get, that I think would go a long way towards restoring parental trust and confidence in their public schools. One is academic transparency, right? Parents should know what's being put in front of their kids. I think in a lot of cases, if parents knew what was kind of being presented to their children under the guise of we're talking about race, it wouldn't last very long, right? I mean, for Ian's point, nobody's saying don't talk about slavery, don't talk about the dark stains of our past. But some people are saying and objecting to things like the Southern Poverty Law Center is teaching hard history, which talks to kindergartners about the horrific evils of slavery, and then challenges them to reflect on unfair power structures around them. And the only power structure around a kindergartner that they know is their mom and dad. So requiring schools to post curriculum in a way that parents can review would, I think, preempt a lot of the problems that we've seen, but also, frankly, restore trust in a lot of schools where I think trust is due. I think there have probably been many public school administrators, many public schools that have been unfairly attacked by local parents who are seeing what's going on in Loudoun, seeing what's going on in Fairfax, and assuming that it's happening in their school district when it might not be. So that's one easy step. Another goes to Ian's point of parental notification and consent. There was a story by Chrissy Clark in the Daily Wire of a parent who wanted to look at a school survey and was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to do so. That's creepy, that's terrible. When it comes to school surveys, when it comes to contentious matters of race, when it comes to gender identity and sexuality instruction, parents should know what's being put in front of their kids. Schools should be required to show parents what's going to be taught, and then give parents the opportunity to opt their children in to particularly contentious things. That would require legislative approval. A third thing, to the safety point, it'd be very, very easy. I don't know for sure whether it would require legislative approval, but I don't know how it could be denied, to delegate a nonprofit organization to conduct every semester an anonymous school safety audit, to give teachers, students, parents an opportunity to answer questions, not about how they're feeling, not about what they think about race, but about, are they safe? Are there fights? And to also allow an open-ended response section to that. I mean, as we said in our Wall Street Journal op-ed on this, it should not take a professional investigative journalist to uncover that a young woman has been raped at school. And there's a very easy, simple, I think non-controversial policy fix. And if you do all those things, I think that a lot will start to fall in line. I think parents will regain trust with their schools where that trust is due, and then the political process will play out and preferences will be met in cases where parents still have problems with what they see going on.
Okay. Kim, when you look at the trends in recent performance in Virginia, what you see is a pretty dramatic decline in things like math and science. Obviously, a lot of that's related to COVID, but it does sort of raise the concern that there has been a kind of erosion of quality in some schools across Virginia. Are there other steps you think that can be taken from the sort of state level in the new administration to get Virginia back on track when it comes to, just these basic educational areas of performance, reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's, so to speak. And then are there also, do you have thoughts about ways that we could kind of give parents in Virginia more choices, particularly when they're not happy with what they're seeing and experiencing in their local schools?
Yeah. Well, first, Brad, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you and Ian and Max today. It's great to have this conversation. I think there is a lot on the governor-elect's plate right now as you think about how to deconstruct, right, what has been really entrenched, I would say, for the last decade in schools in Virginia. And so I think this is a really important conversation. There's no doubt that over the past decade, we've seen a shift in focus, I think, at the state level in Virginia, but also at the local school district level, right? So Ian alluded to this a bit, right? We've seen this shift to more non-academic approaches and non-academic programs, things like critical race theory, things like social and emotional learning, all of this while student outcomes are suffering, right? The Lieutenant Governor-elect was in the news just last week because she highlighted the fact that only 84% of the 8th graders are proficient in, or I'm sorry, 84% are not proficient in math, and 85% of 8th graders are not, of Black 8th graders are not proficient in reading. Those are consistent statewide, right? And, you know, I think that what we're going to have to focus on, what the governor-elect is going to have to focus on, is really making a shift back to student-focused and student-centered policies. And I think that that is going to be a shift that is going to happen at the state level, where we put outcomes first and where we put the needs of students first. And, you know, I think that that looks, I think that can look a lot of different ways. But I think it's about making sure that kids are ready to learn when they show up at school at 8 o'clock in the morning. I think it's making sure that teachers have the supports that they need, making sure that all of our teachers are highly qualified, and really reintroducing just data-driven and really focusing on data-driven decisions within schools. And we should be focusing on student outcomes. We should be focusing on what's best for kids. And, you know, shifting the focus back to those academic performance issues, I think is going to be very important moving forward. You know, just to build on some of Max's comments, I think that just restoring the parent voice in Virginia is going to be key for the governor-elect in over the next 4 years. You know, this was not only an issue in the most recent election, but we all know that student outcomes are better when parents are involved, right? When parents are directly involved in their children's school, when they're involved in educational decisions, students just do better. And, you know, I think on day one, the governor-elect should release a Parents' Bill of Rights for parents in the state of Virginia that establishes and recognizes and enshrines their rights to be directly involved, not only in education related matters, but, you know, but also in health and in other medical treatment in other types of areas. I think the governor-elect should establish a statewide parental engagement committee, just full of parents, so that he is constantly hearing from parents in Virginia who have concerns and who have who need to need to see policy changes in their local schools. But there's no doubt that the most effective way to really engage parents is to really look at choice options in the state of Virginia. And we know that Virginia does not rank high in objective evaluations as far as options that are available to students. And that's certainly an area for improvement.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. On that last point, though, I just wanted to sort of ask you if you've got any thoughts. I mean, we know that states like Arizona, for instance, have done much better on charter schools than have other states, including Virginia.
Right.
There's also been a push in a variety of different states to have generous educational savings accounts,
yeah.
Including recently in West Virginia. So do you have any sort of concrete ideas about, how a kind of choice agenda that would bring more charter schools to Virginia and also give parents more options in terms of ESAs, for instance? Any thoughts about kind of what that might look like here in the state of Virginia?
Sure. Well, it's a difficult situation, Brad, because as you know, these are statutorily mandated programs, right? So Virginia's charter school law is very specific. And the truth of the matter is that it limits options for parents, right? So there are only 8 charter schools in the state of Virginia. It tends to be a very onerous application process. It's not a friendly application process for individuals or entities who want to operate charter schools. Once you get, if you are one of the few people or groups who are actually able to get a charter school going, they just don't have a lot of autonomy under our state law. They don't have a lot of flexibility. And honestly, they operate under the thumb of a local school district. So you can't even start a charter school without the local approval of the state board. I'm sorry, of the local school board. And the local school board controls things like finances and educational decision-making and things like that. And so unfortunately, I think we're in a position where, the governor-elect is going to have to really work with members of the state legislature in order to to make some significant changes in the state law. And I'm hoping that opportunities for students is a nonpartisan issue, and that he'll be able to make some gains in that area. In the meantime, though, what I think is very important, and I think this applies to both charter schools and voucher types of tax credit scholarship programs, I think that we really need to look at the regulations that have been put in place, do a really thorough regulatory review to make sure that regulations are not inappropriately impacting the growth of charter schools, make sure there are no limitations that are stifling growth or keeping students from participating in those programs. I think that's true for non-regulatory guidance as well, really doing a thorough review of the guidance that's been issued by the state, just making sure that they are not over-regulating this space. I also think it would be a great idea to create kind of a charter engagement team within the State Department of Education. I think if you prioritize matching potential providers with school board members across the state who are open, really focus on that engagement, really focus on matching individuals who may be interested in opening charter schools with those sponsoring boards. I think that you could see some growth there. And I think that's the bottom line. How do we grow in this space? And I think there are ways to do that.
Great. Max, any other thoughts you might have about, again, there's been a decline in a lot of the state's performance on these key metrics, the SOLs and whatnot. Any other thoughts you have, Max, about what the state could do? And obviously, in some ways, the state's power is somewhat limited here, but are there other measures the new administration could take to help kind of strengthen student performance in things like math and science and English?
Yeah, there absolutely are, and I think in ways that can very easily build off of each other, right? I think one of the first steps that Youngkin and his administration should take should be to promote academic transparency, so that parents can see what's happening in their schools, can see what students are being taught. The best argument against that that's been raised several times, however, is that this is going to be onerous for teachers. This is going to be a lot more time recording their lesson plans, uploading things that they're putting in front of kids. But that objection should raise a certain question in parents' minds. Like, wait, I thought that teachers taught from curriculum. I thought that there were textbooks. As it turns out, that is far more frequently not the case than the case. There was a Rand Institute study suggesting that about 95% of teachers will basically triage their lesson plans ad hoc at the last minute from Google or Pinterest. And I think once parents start to really kind of see beyond the original controversies and the original kind of having been appalled at what they saw at digital learning, what having been appalled at some of the particular lessons, they'll start to realize, wait, there isn't really much of a rhyme or reason to a lot of what's being put in front of my children, and maybe there should be. And so while the, Youngkin's administration, him as a governor, whoever the Secretary of Education is, might not necessarily want to say that every school must use a core knowledge curriculum, or that every school must investigate the possibility of using a classical curriculum, or every school district must debate using Singapore math. They could certainly use their pedestal, their bully pulpit, to, instead of hosting people like Bettina Love, who will accuse white teachers of spirit murdering Black and brown students, who will call for the abolishment of school altogether, they can use their pedestal to actually speak on behalf of good curricula and help parents have an engine or kind of an on-ramp to pressure their schools to adopt that curriculum. It's kind of astonishing, frankly, how, despite all the Sturm und Drang about education policy that we've had in all sorts of areas for the last 15 years, certainly ever since I've come onto the scene, we don't talk about curriculum as much as we should, and yet what you teach students matters. If students are taught better things, they will probably learn better. And I think it could be very refreshing to see, academic transparency start to yield a real conversation about knowledge-rich curriculum.
Thanks, Max. Max just mentioned that what the students are taught matters, and it's an obvious point. But Ian, in terms of thinking about one other topic here that might come up is this idea of what's been called the success sequence, by Bell Sawhill and Ron Haskins at Brookings, and just wondering, if this is the kind of thing that might be introduced into state standards when it comes to family life education or personal finance. So Ian, what is the success sequence and how might it be relevant for high school or middle school students in the state of Virginia?
Yeah, and let me just first echo some of the things that Kim and Max said. I mean, it's so disheartening to hear that there are only 7 charter schools in all of Virginia. I mean, in New York City alone, we have more than 200 public charter schools in some of the most hardly hit communities across the city. I mean, in the district I lead schools in, only 2% of kids that go to the traditional high schools start 9th grade 4 years later, actually graduate from high school ready for college, meaning that 98% either drop out or they actually graduate with their diploma, but still can't do reading nor math without remediation if they were to actually go to college. So, you know, the governor, I really hope the governor takes a step back and look at the framework that exists for parents who are trapped in those systems and use his power to create more of a choice environment. And on this point of the success sequence, you know, it is quite amazing. Probably 50, 60 years ago, there was a study done by James Coleman, which I believe today still sits as the most significant educational study ever done. 700,000 students were part of the study, more than 60,000 teachers, more than 4,000 schools, all to answer this question: why is it that we're seeing such disparities in academic outcomes amongst students of different racial groups? And people assumed it was going to be, well, it's differences in teacher quality or per pupil funding. Well, it turned out that the #1 factor was home environment and family structure. You know, we just have to accept that that's the reality. That doesn't mean we shouldn't also focus on rigorous reading, math, and science, but recognize that the importance of family structure is monumental as it relates to student outcomes. So if we know that, what is our responsibility to teach kids who, you know, in a few years will be forming the next generation through their decisions as they make their passage into young adulthood? And so the success sequence is a term that's used by data. That data describes a series of behaviors, typically starting with just finishing your high school degree, then getting full-time work of any kind, just so you learn the dignity and discipline of work. And if you have children, marriage first. Isabel Sawhill and Ron Haskins found that 98% of the people who followed that series of decisions avoided poverty. And Brad, I know you did a follow-up study of young millennials where you found that number was 97%. So the point is, there's never a guarantee in life, but shouldn't young people be taught that there are a series of life decisions that dramatically increase their likelihood of success? And one final, personal story, I'm launching a new network of high schools in the South Bronx next year. A few years ago, I visited a class of 9th graders in New Orleans, again, predominantly low-income district. And I said to them, if you knew that there were a series of decisions in your control, that 97% of the time, people who followed it, those decisions resulted in almost never experiencing poverty and entry into the middle class, would you want to know? And the kid said, of course I'd want to know. And I said, well, there are people who think I'd be moralizing and you shouldn't know and all this stuff. And they looked at me like I had a third eyeball here. And so we proceeded to have a great discussion about the elements of the success sequence. And so I think if we really want to respect young people so that they can understand what are the factors in their control that give them and their future families the best chances of success, we should be teaching the success sequence, not as a prescription, but a description, so they can understand the probabilities of their decision-making for their own lives.
That's a great way to end, I think, our conversation, Ian, on that note. And I just wanted to thank, Max and Kim and Ian for being with us here today on this edition of Family Matters. And we're grateful for your wisdom, your advice, your counsel to the new administration here in Virginia, coming in to hopefully make some real progress in advancing the concerns of parents across the Commonwealth. So thank you for joining us here today.